A woman called me to say she was married to my husband. She lived 23 miles away. My name is Patricia. I am 39 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and 2 years ago I received a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon that ended one version of my life and began another one I had not asked for and was not prepared for. The woman on the other end of the call introduced herself as Michelle. She said she was calling because she believed we had something in common that we needed to discuss. She said she was sorry to be making this call. She said she had found my number after 3 weeks of searching, and that she had rehearsed what she was going to say many times, and that none of her rehearsals had felt adequate. Then she told me she was married to my husband. I want to take you back to before that phone call because the before matters as much as the after. My husband's name is Robert. We had been married for 7 years when Michelle called. We met at a work conference in Atlanta, dated for 2 years, got married in a small ceremony in Charleston with about 40 people. Robert worked in commercial real estate, which meant he traveled frequently, sometimes several days a week, sometimes full weeks at a time. I had always accepted his travel schedule as a feature of his career. I had never questioned it in any serious way because I had never had serious reason to. We had a comfortable life. A house in a good neighborhood, 2 cars, a golden retriever named Chester. A social life that was full enough to feel complete. I worked as a hospital administrator. I was good at my job. I had my own identity outside of our marriage. I was not a woman who had built her entire existence around her husband. I say this because I think it matters. I was not naive in any obvious way. I was simply trusting in the way that people are when they have been given no concrete reason not to be. Michelle lived 23 miles away. I need you to sit with that for a moment. 23 miles. In the same city. Robert had 2 wives, 2 houses, 2 lives, 2 dogs. Michelle also had a golden retriever, a fact that I found almost unbearably strange when it came out, in the same metropolitan area for 4 years. His travel schedule was not travel. It was commuting between 2 domestic lives. He had constructed with the precision of someone who had thought about nothing else. Michelle had found out 3 weeks before she called me. She had found a credit card statement for a card she had not known existed, and had followed the thread with the particular determination of a woman who already knew on some level what she was going to find. She had found my name in a document on Robert's laptop. She had found our address. She had spent 3 weeks deciding whether to call. I am glad she called. After Michelle told me who she was, I sat down on my kitchen floor. I do not remember deciding to sit on the floor. I simply became aware that I was on it, back against the kitchen cabinets, phone pressed to my ear, Chester sitting next to me with his chin on my knee because dogs always know. Michelle and I talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes that first call. We compared timelines, compared stories, compared the specific texture of the lies we had each been told and the ways they had been maintained. Robert had kept us perfectly separated. Different social circles, different parts of the city, different everything, with a logistical precision that would have been impressive if it had not been monstrous. By the end of that call, Michelle and I had agreed on 2 things. We were not going to tell Robert what we knew until we had each spoken to a divorce attorney. And we were going to share information with each other freely because we were the only 2 people in the world who fully understood what the other was dealing with. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name was Sandra and she had been recommended to me by a colleague, and she turned out to be exactly what I needed. Calm, strategic, completely unsentimental about the situation. She told me that in North Carolina bigamy is a criminal offense, not just a civil matter. She told me that Robert had exposed himself to significant legal liability. She told me to document everything and to be very careful about what I said and did in the next several weeks. I went home that evening and I made dinner and I sat across from Robert at our kitchen table and I talked to him about my day and I watched him lie to my face with the ease of someone who had been doing it for 4 years, and I ate my dinner and I said nothing. I did this for 11 days. On the 12th day, Michelle and I met in person for the first time. We met at a coffee shop exactly halfway between our 2 houses, 11.5 miles from each of us, which felt like a detail that belonged in a story that was happening to someone else. Michelle was tall, dark-haired, a middle school science teacher. She was composed in the specific way of someone who has been crying privately for weeks and has decided to be done with it for now. We sat across from each other and we were both aware of the strangeness of the situation. 2 women meeting because one man had decided both of them were manageable. And then we ordered coffee and we got to work. We had each been doing our own documentation separately. Together we had a complete picture that was significantly more damaging than either half alone. We brought that picture to Sandra together, and Sandra spent 2 hours going through it with us, and then she said, with what I can only describe as controlled professional satisfaction, that she was going to enjoy this case. Robert was served divorce papers. Both sets from both of us coordinated to arrive on the same day, on a Thursday morning in March. I was not there when it happened, but Michelle texted me at 10:47 a.m. and said delivered. And I sat in my office and felt something that was not quite satisfaction but was close to it. Robert called me 46 times between 10:47 a.m. and midnight. I answered twice. Both conversations were short. I told him I knew everything that I had known for weeks, and that he should direct further communication to Sandra. He said he could explain. I said I was certain he believed that. The criminal bigamy charge was filed separately from the civil divorce proceedings. Robert's attorney negotiated aggressively. The outcome involved a guilty plea to a reduced charge, significant financial consequences, and a criminal record that will follow him. The civil divorce took 8 months. I received the house, Chester, and a settlement that Sandra described as appropriate given the circumstances. Michelle received a comparable outcome. Robert, who had been maintaining 2 households on what turned out to be a combined income supplemented by debt neither of us had known about, ended up in a significantly diminished financial position. His own doing. Every part of it his own doing. Michelle and I are friends. This surprises people the most when I tell this story. We text regularly. We have had dinner 6 times. We are bound by something that has no name in normal social vocabulary. We are not sisters, not colleagues, not the usual category of friend. We are 2 people who survive the same thing from opposite sides and who understand each other in a way that nobody else in our lives fully can. Chester as well. He is 7 now and slightly arthritic in one hip, and he still puts his chin on my knee when he knows I need it. Robert is living in an apartment in a part of the city I do not frequent. I know this because Charlotte is 23 miles of mutual territory and these things get. Back to you. So Reddit, was I wrong to spend 11 days saying nothing while I built my case? Was I wrong to coordinate with Michelle instead of confronting him immediately? Because some people say I should have said something the moment I found out. But I wanted to walk away whole. And I did. White medium star story 2. I found out my identical twin sister had been pretending to be me at my job for 6 months. My boss knew and said nothing. My name is Sarah. I am 33 years old, I live in Denver, Colorado, and 8 months ago I discovered that my identical twin sister had been attending my job in my place, using my credentials, sitting at my desk, attending my meetings, and collecting my paycheck for approximately 6 months while I believed I was working remotely and she believed she was getting away with something that is, I have since confirmed, a federal crime. The situation is as complicated as it sounds. Let me explain. My sister's name is Kate. We are identical twins in the specific way that has caused confusion our entire lives. Same height, same face, same voice, same mannerisms that we developed separately and arrived at identically. Growing up, this was sometimes fun and sometimes exhausting. As adults, it has mostly been a curiosity and occasionally a convenience, and now once an absolute disaster. I work as a data analyst for a financial services company. About 18 months ago, the company transitioned to a hybrid work model. 2 days in office, 3 days remote. I live 40 minutes from the office. Kate lives 6 minutes from the office. Kate was between jobs at the time of the transition, something she had told me was temporary but which had lasted longer than either of us had expected. The arrangement started, according to Kate when she eventually explained it, as a one-time favor. I had a conflict on an in-office day. I do not even remember what it was now, something minor. And I asked Kate half-jokingly if she could cover for me since we looked identical and she lived close. Kate said yes. It worked. Nobody noticed or said anything. I thought it was a funny story we would tell at family dinners. Kate did not experience it as a one-time favor. Kate experienced it as a solution. Over the following months, Kate began covering my in-office days with increasing regularity. I was not aware this was happening because I believed I was working remotely on the days she was actually going in. Kate had access to my work email. I had given it to her during the original favor for coordination purposes and had not revoked that access, and she began managing my in-office presence while I managed my remote presence, and somehow for approximately 6 months the seams did not show. I found out because of a performance review. My manager called me in for what's extracted and presented to strangers as evidence is a violation that I do not have adequate language for. I heard myself crying on the phone to my mother. I heard myself arguing with David in ways that were ugly and human and private. I heard myself at my worst and most vulnerable, being used as a case against myself. Rebecca fought back comprehensively. The illegality of the recording process was argued extensively. Expert testimony about the recording devices and their placement was presented. Character witnesses, documentation of my parenting, Ella's relationship with me, all of it carefully assembled and presented. The judge ruled that the recordings obtained after the separation date were inadmissible due to the consent issues. Frank was charged criminally with unlawful surveillance. David, whose knowledge of the recording scheme was disputed, he maintained he had not known about the devices until after they were found, which I do not fully believe but could not prove, was not charged. I have primary custody of Ella. David has regular visitation. Frank is not permitted to be present during visitation exchanges per a court order. Frank's criminal case resulted in a plea agreement. He did not go to prison. He received probation and a fine that my attorney described as insultingly low, and that I have made my peace with because the custody outcome was what mattered. Ella is 7 now. She is in 2nd grade. She loves dinosaurs and swimming in a cartoon about a dog that I have watched approximately 800 times. She knows that things changed with her dad's family in ways that she will understand better when she is older. She knows that her mother fought for her. I have made sure she knows that. Update 6 months later. David and I have found a co-parenting rhythm that is functional if not warm. We communicate primarily through a co-parenting app that Rebecca suggested, and it has helped keep things focused on Ella and away from everything else. Frank is not part of Ella's life. This was my condition and the court supported it. David does not like it, but he has accepted it because the alternative was worse for him legally. I had all the walls in my house professionally swept for devices 6 months ago. They found nothing. I have them swept every 6 months now. I do not expect to find anything. I do it anyway because some violations change the way you inhabit a space permanently. My home feels like mine again. Mostly. So Reddit, was I wrong to pursue criminal charges against my father-in-law instead of focusing only on the civil custody case? Because David's family says I destroyed Frank's life over a misunderstanding. But Frank put a recording device outside my daughter's bedroom. I want to know what you think. My name is Claire. I am 37 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and 3 years ago I discovered something about my marriage that made me question every assumption I had built my adult life around. Not an affair. Not a secret family. Not hidden money, although money was involved. What I discovered was that my husband of 8 years had engineered my entire career. The job I had worked for, the promotions I had earned, the professional identity I had built from nothing. From behind a wall of corporate structure so deliberately constructed that I had worked for him for 3 years without knowing he was my employer. I need to take you back to the beginning because the beginning is where the architecture of this was laid and the beginning matters. My husband's name is James. We met when I was 26 and he was 31. He was charming, successful, quietly confident in the way of people who have never had serious reason to doubt themselves. He worked in corporate consulting, or so he told me, and so I believed because why would I not believe it? He had an office. He had colleagues. He attended conferences. He came home with the particular tiredness of someone who had spent their day doing real and demanding work. I had no reason to examine any of it. I worked in marketing. I had started my career at a mid-size agency, and had done well enough that when a recruiter reached out about a position at a company called Meridian Group, I took the call seriously. Meridian was a corporate communications and marketing firm with a strong reputation, good benefits, and a salary that was a significant step up from where I was. The recruiter was professional, the interview process was thorough, and I was offered the position and accepted it feeling the particular satisfaction of someone who has earned something through their own merit. I worked at Meridian for 3 years. I was good at my job. I received 2 promotions during that time. I had a manager named David who I respected and a team I liked and a professional life that I was proud of, and that felt entirely mine. I discovered the truth because of a document I was never supposed to see. I was working late one evening, James was traveling, I was alone in our home office using our shared printer, and a document printed that was not mine. I almost set it aside without reading it. It was clearly a corporate document, dense with financial language, and my instinct was that it had printed from James's laptop queue by mistake. I read the cover page. Then I read the next page. Then I sat down in our office chair and I read the entire 47-page document. It was a shareholder report for a holding company called Meridian Holdings. The document detailed the corporate structure of several subsidiaries. One of those subsidiaries was listed as Meridian Group, my employer. The majority shareholder and founder of Meridian Holdings was listed as James Michael Hartley. My husband's full name is James Michael Hartley. I want to try to explain what the next several hours felt like, but I am not sure language is adequate for it. I sat in our home office with that document and I went back through 3 years of my professional life looking for the seams. The recruiter who had reached out to me, had James known about that outreach? My 2 promotions, had they been earned or engineered? David, my manager, had he known who I was? The specific texture of every professional interaction I had experienced at Meridian began to look different, began to carry questions it had not carried before. I did not call James. He was traveling or performing traveling. I now understood I needed to hold that word loosely, and I did not want to have this conversation on the phone in the middle of the night. I wanted to have it face to face and I wanted to be prepared. I spent the next 3 days preparing. I am a marketing professional. Research and analysis are my actual skill set. I spent 3 days doing what I do professionally, gathering information, building a complete picture, understanding the structure of what I was looking at before I said a single word to the person most implicated in it. I confirmed James's ownership of Meridian Holdings through public corporate filings. I confirmed the subsidiary relationship with Meridian Group. I found the original incorporation documents which were dated 14 months before the recruiter had reached out to me. 14 months before. He had built the company and then placed me in it more than a year later. This had not been an impulse or an accident of circumstance. This had been planned. James came home on a Thursday evening. I had made dinner. We ate. We talked about his trip. He asked about my week. I told him it had been interesting and watched his face for anything and found nothing because James is, I now understand, extremely good at finding nothing. After dinner, I put the shareholder report on the table between us. I watched James look at it. I watched him understand what I was telling him by putting it there. His face did not do what I expected. He did not go pale. He did not scramble for an explanation. He sat back in his chair and he looked at me with an expression I can only describe as resigned and said, "How long have you known?" I told him 3 days. He nodded as if this was a reasonable amount of time. Then he explained. He told me that when we had been dating he had watched me struggle with a professional environment that was not recognizing what he believed was significant talent. He said he had watched me work hard and be overlooked and had felt a particular kind of frustration that he had not known what to do with. He said the idea of Meridian had started as a genuine business concept. He had always wanted to build something in the communication space, and that the decision to place me there had come later, when the company was already in development, as something that felt like a solution to something that had been bothering him. He said he had told David the truth. David had known from the beginning that I was James's wife and had been asked to evaluate me entirely on my merits and to report honestly if I was not performing. James said David had told him after 6 months that I was one of the strongest people on the team, and that the promotions had been David's recommendation, not James's instruction. He said he had told himself many times that he was going to tell me, and that he had never found the right moment, and that the longer it went the less possible telling me felt. I listened to everything. Then I asked him one question. I asked him whether he understood that what he had done, regardless of his intentions, had taken the thing I was most proud of, my professional identity and my sense that I had built something myself, and retroactively made it uncertain in a way I might never fully resolve. He said yes. He said he was sorry. He said sorry in the specific way of someone who means it and knows it is not enough. I did not leave immediately. I want to be honest about that. I did not pack a bag that night or the next day. I spent 2 weeks living in our house in a state of suspended evaluation, going to work at Meridian, which was surreal in a way I cannot fully describe, processing what I knew and what I felt and what I wanted to do with both. I resigned from Meridian on a Monday morning 3 weeks after I found the document. I told David I was leaving for personal reasons, and he nodded in a way that told me he understood more than he said. I had a meeting with my own attorney separate from any divorce proceedings, just to understand my position, and was told that James had not technically done anything illegal, that the company was real and my employment had been legitimate and my promotions had been merit-based. Legitimate. Merit-based. Words that should have been simple and that now contain more complexity than I knew what to do with. James and I did not divorce. I know this is the part that will generate the most response. We are in therapy, serious twice weekly, with a therapist who does not allow either of us to be comfortable or evasive. James has been more honest in therapy than I knew he was capable of being. We have had conversations about control and love, and the specific way that doing something for someone can become a way of doing something to them without ever intending harm. These are not simple conversations. They are not comfortable ones. I have a new job. I found it myself, applied, interviewed, received an offer based on a resume and a skill set that I built and that nobody engineered. I started 4 months ago. My new manager does not know my husband. My new company has no connection to James in any corporate structure I have been able to find. I have checked. I check things now that I did not used to check. That is perhaps the most lasting change. Update: 5 months later. David reached out to me 2 months after I left Meridian. He sent a professional email asking if we could meet for coffee. I said yes because I had questions I had not been able to ask before. We met at a neutral location. David told me that James had contacted him when he was building Meridian and had been completely transparent about who I was and what he was hoping to do. David told me he had agreed because James had assured him that my position would be entirely merit-based and that David was free to let me go if I was not performing. David said he had agonized about the ethics of the arrangement many times over 3 years, and that he had told himself it was acceptable because the evaluation had been honest. I told David I appreciated his honesty. I told him I thought he had made a decision that was more complicated than he had allowed himself to fully examine at the time. He agreed. We have had coffee twice since. We are something like professional acquaintances now. James and I are still married. We are still in therapy. I do not know if we will stay married. That is an honest answer to a question I have stopped trying to force. What I know is that I am in a job I found myself doing, work I know I earned, and that I sleep better than I have in 5 years. My therapist says the hardest part of what happened is not the deception itself but the way it contaminated something I had built my sense of self around. She says reclaiming that sense of self is possible but that it takes longer than people expect and feels different than it did before. She is right on both counts. So Reddit, was I wrong to stay? Was James wrong to build a company to place his wife in because he believed in her talent and did not know another way to help? Is that love or is that control? Because I have been asking myself that question for 8 months and I have not arrived at a clean answer. Tell me what you think. Or what she described as a routine check-in. I attended in person because it felt like the right thing to do for a direct conversation. My manager, a woman named Diane who I had worked with for 3 years and believed I had a solid professional relationship with, sat across from me and said several things about my recent in-office performance that did not match my memory of any interaction I had actually had. She referenced a presentation I had no memory of giving. She mentioned a conflict with a colleague that I had no knowledge of. She praised my handling of a client situation that I could not place. I sat in that meeting and I nodded and I said as little as possible and I went home and I called Kate. Kate answered on the 3rd ring. I told her what Diane had said. There was a silence that lasted long enough to tell me everything. Then Kate said, "Okay, I need to explain something." She explained it for 2 hours. By the end of those 2 hours I had a complete picture of what had been happening in my professional life for 6 months without my knowledge. Kate had been doing my job. Not poorly, apparently quite well, which created its own complicated feelings, but without my knowledge or consent and using my identity and my credentials. I asked her how Diane had not noticed. Kate said Diane had noticed about 3 months in that something was slightly different. Kate said Diane had called her into the office privately and Kate had told her the truth. And Diane had said, and this is the part that made my head genuinely hurt, Diane had said that Kate's work was strong, and that she did not want to disrupt a functioning arrangement, and that she would keep what she knew to herself. My manager had known for 3 months that my twin sister was impersonating me at my job, and had said nothing to me. I called an employment attorney the next morning. Then I called HR at my company. Then I called Kate back and told her what I had done. Kate was silent for a long time and then said, "I figured this was coming." I told her I was not going to protect her from the consequences of her own choices. She said she understood. I believed her. The HR investigation took 4 weeks. Diane was placed on administrative leave during the investigation and subsequently resigned before any formal action was taken. Kate cooperated fully with everything. I think she had known on some level that the arrangement was always going to end this way and had decided that full cooperation was her best path through it. The company's legal team was involved. Federal laws around identity fraud and credential misuse were discussed at length. Kate's cooperation and the fact that no financial fraud had technically occurred. She had not taken money in her own name. The paycheck had gone to my account, resulted in a resolution that did not involve criminal charges but did involve a formal agreement with consequences I will not fully detail here. My job is intact. Diane is gone. Kate and I are not currently speaking, which is the first extended period of not speaking we have had in 33 years of being alive at the same time. What I find hardest to explain to people is that I am not only angry at Kate, I am also, underneath the anger, sad in a specific way. Kate was struggling. She needed work and income and purpose, and rather than asking me directly for help, she constructed an elaborate solution that served her needs while systematically dismantling my professional identity without my knowledge. That is a choice that came from a place of desperation and shame and poor judgment, and I understand all of those things even as I am furious about what they produced. I also cannot fully explain what it feels like to discover that your face, your voice, your professional reputation, the things that are most specifically you, were being used by someone else for 6 months. It is a violation that does not have clean edges. Update 3 months later. Kate reached out 6 weeks ago. She sent a letter. Actual paper, actual handwriting, 8 pages. She explained everything she had been feeling in the months before the arrangement began. The shame of her job situation, the desperation, the way the first time had felt harmless and the way each subsequent time had felt like something she could not stop without admitting to how far it had already gone. She asked if I would be willing to talk. We met for coffee 2 weeks ago. It was the most honest conversation we have had in our lives, which is a strange thing to say about a conversation that is happening because of a profound betrayal. We talked for 4 hours. I did not tell her I forgave her because I do not know yet if I do. I told her I was willing to try to understand, and that understanding was the first step toward whatever came next. She is in therapy. She has a job now, a real one, her own, in her own name. She texted me last week a photo of her first paycheck and said, "Mine." I texted back one word. Good. We are not where we were. I do not know if we will get back there. But we are somewhere, and somewhere is more than nothing. So Reddit, was I wrong to report my own twin sister instead of handling it privately? And was my manager's decision to stay silent for 3 months worse than what Kate did? Tell me what you think. White Medium Star Story 3. Seuss Reddit Stories. My father-in-law secretly recorded every conversation in our house for 2 years, and used it against me in court. My name is Angela. I am 35 years old, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and 2 years ago I discovered that my father-in-law had placed 3 recording devices in my home without my knowledge or consent, and had been systematically collecting audio of my private conversations, my arguments with my husband, my phone calls, and my most vulnerable moments for approximately 26 months. He used those recordings in a custody dispute. Let me give you the full picture because this story has layers that matter. My husband's name is David. We had been married for 6 years when things began to fall apart. We have one daughter together, Ella, who is now 7 years old and who is the most important person in my life, and the reason every decision I made during this period was made as carefully as I could make it. David and I had problems that had been building for years: communication issues, incompatible life priorities, a growing distance that couples therapy had not been able to fully close. By the time Ella was 4, it had become clear to both of us that we were heading toward separation. David's father, a man named Frank who had never fully accepted me as a member of his son's family, had been a source of tension in our marriage from very early on. Frank had strong opinions about how David's life should be structured, strong opinions about me specifically, and a long history of involving himself in our marriage in ways that David consistently minimized and I consistently found intrusive. I had complained about Frank to David many times over 6 years. David loved his father and had a blind spot about his behavior that I had stopped expecting to change. When David and I separated, Frank's involvement escalated immediately. He was at David's new apartment within days. He was present at conversations about co-parenting arrangements that should have been private. He offered opinions on the divorce proceedings that nobody had solicited. I told David clearly that I was uncomfortable with Frank's level of involvement, and David told me that Frank was just being supportive. The recording devices were found by a contractor. I had hired someone to do some minor electrical work in our house. I had kept the family home after David moved out, and the contractor was working in the living room wall cavity when he found the first one. He called me over and showed it to me. I did not know what I was looking at immediately. He explained it to me. It was a small audio recording device, battery-powered, designed to be concealable. He found a second one in the kitchen within the hour. A third was found in the hallway outside Ella's bedroom. I sat in my living room after the contractor left, and I thought about what 26 months of recorded audio contained. 26 months of private phone calls. 26 months of conversations with my friends, my mother, my therapist. I had taken calls from my therapist at home. 26 months of arguments with David, conversations about Ella, moments of vulnerability and frustration and private grief that I had experienced in what I believed was the privacy of my own home. I called my attorney before I called anyone else. Her name was Rebecca, and she had been handling my divorce proceedings, and she had, over the course of our work together, become someone I trusted completely. I told her what the contractor had found. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Do not touch them, do not move them, photograph everything exactly as it is, and I will be there in the morning." Rebecca arrived at 8 a.m. with a digital forensics expert. The devices were documented, photographed, and removed by the expert for analysis. The analysis confirmed what I had suspected. They had been recording for approximately 26 months. The recordings had been regularly accessed remotely, and the access logs pointed to a device registered to Frank. In Georgia, recording someone without their consent in their own home is a crime. Rebecca filed a police report the same week. Frank was interviewed by detectives. Frank's attorney immediately began arguing that Frank had believed the devices were in David's home during a period when David lived there, and that the recordings were therefore legal under Georgia's one-party consent laws. This argument did not fully hold up because Ella's bedroom hallway is not a space David had any particular claim to after separation, and because Rebecca is very good at her job. The custody proceedings became significantly more complicated. Frank had shared recordings with David's divorce attorney, and some of that audio had been used in preliminary custody arguments, recordings of me venting to friends, recordings of me having difficult conversations, recordings of private moments that were now being presented in a legal context to characterize me as an unfit parent. I want to tell you that the recordings were devastating to hear in a courtroom context. Not because they showed me doing anything wrong. I had not done anything wrong, but because